to say I've spoken in a lot of courtrooms for a lot of judges and a lot of juries. I've never before had to do it in the round. So bear with me, I'm going to do my best, but it's not really, I'm used to having a lectern and a jury there and a judge there. I want to begin by expressing my profound gratitude for all the important work that family equality has done for so many years. When Ron DeSantis passed the truly noxious Don't Say Gay law back in 2022, I knew that something had to be done about it. As the great Rabbi Hillel asked over 2,000 years ago, if not now, when? In building the case, I knew that along with individual plaintiffs like the fabulous Xander Moritz, who you just saw, we needed what nerdy lawyers like me like to call institutional plaintiffs. I also knew exactly where to go for that, right here to the folks at Family Equality. It took a couple of years, but we were able to make it clear to all parents, all teachers, and all kids that it is perfectly okay to say gay in Florida. And by the way, I obviously want to thank the equally brave and equally fabulous E. Jean Carroll, who told me that this was her first ever gay event. I told E.G. in response that while she'd been to a lot of galas, she'd never really been to a gala until she came to this gala tonight. I also want to congratulate Ken and his beautiful family. It's truly an honor to be here with you this evening. But my gratitude to Family Equality is by no means limited to all that. It is only because of Family Equality that I have a family whose rights are protected. So what I thought I would do tonight is to tell a story of an LGBTQ family like any good opera in 3 acts. That family happens to be my own. So it begins, believe it or not, many of you probably weren't even born then, in the year 1995. At that point in time, I was clerking for a judge by the name of Judith Kay, who was the chief judge at New York's highest court. Near the end of my clerkship, the court got a case involving the ability of lesbian couples to adopt their own kids. Under New York law back then, as my son likes to say, in the last century, any person married to a biological parent could adopt his or her spouse's child as a step-parent. If you weren't married, though, you could only adopt your partner's child if your partner agreed to give up their own parental rights, which obviously no one was willing to do. It was one thing, in my mind, to tell straight couples that they must marry before adopting each other's kids, since at least they had that option. But it was quite different to say the same thing to gay or lesbian couples, since it obviously was impossible back then for them to get married. And take it from me, back in 1995, marriage equality was a faraway fantasy. What this meant is for lesbian and gay couples, they could never both become the legal parents of their own kids. So I'm going to try to walk around a little as I tell the story. So oral arguments in the case took place in June 1995. The next morning, as was the practice, the judges voted. And the split was 4-3, with our side and my judge, Judge Kay, on the losing side. Typically, after a vote like that is taken, the court hands down its opinion within a couple weeks. As Judge Kay's law clerk, my job was to help her write her dissent. But I refused to accept that the decision was going to go against the lesbian and gay couples. One of the other judges on the court had started his career as a family court judge. It seemed to me that he was our best shot at convincing him to change his votes. So I started, as obsessively as I sometimes can be, lobbying his clerk, going on and on about an obscure point about how to interpret statutes. In August, more than 2 months after that initial 4-3 vote, I received a call from my friend. "Congratulations," she said. "Chief Judge Kay is now writing the majority opinion." In response, I started screaming like a wild banshee in my office. Judge Kay was having a meeting with some other judges in the conference room next door. They said to her, "What in the world is going on?" And Judge K responded, I'm going to try to do my Judge K imitation. "Oh, don't mind that," Judge K replied. "That's just my law clerk, Robbie." It seems funny when you think about it today, but Chief Judge K's opinion actually says very little, really nothing, about the right of gay parents. Instead, she focused on the rights of their kids. Why? The reason is because back then, most people did not believe that gay couples deserved the same rights as straight couples. So instead, Judge K had to reason that by denying kids the opportunity of having their two de facto parents become their legal parents, based solely on their parents' sexual orientation, was not only unjust, but it was inconsistent with the whole purpose of the adoption statute, which is the best interest of the child. Act 2. Flash forward 4 years, when I first met Rachel Levine, who sadly is very sick at home tonight and can't be here. I told my son I didn't want anyone to think we were getting divorced. And that changed everything. How did I meet Rachel? I met her at Rosh Hashanah services at CBST, New York's Gay and Lesbian Synagogue. In other words, just another typical New York Jewish lesbian night on the town. I was immediately amazed by how smart and funny she was, not to mention how beautiful and warm. The first time I asked Rachel to marry me, and I asked her many, many times, she responded, "Don't be ridiculous." Rachel was frustrated by the lack of recognition of marriage rights for gay Americans. But one morning, in the spring of 2005, she looked up at me and said, "We plan to have a child. Let's get married. We don't have many rights, but whatever rights we do have, I want us to have them together as parents." Our dear friend, Rabbi Jana Urbach married us. During that ceremony, she reminded us about what makes marriage different. When you marry, you have closed the door to the idea of leaving the relationship. You say to each other, "I will stand with you for the rest of my life, no matter what happens." Now, Act 3. In 2006, Rachel gave birth, you've already heard from me, Jean, to our amazing son, Jacob, who's sitting right here. A few weeks after Jacob was born, I started the process of adopting him. Believe it or not, it was that very decision that I had worked on a decade earlier that made it possible for me to do so. This meant not only did we have to fill out lots of paperwork, but we also had to schedule a home visit with a social worker. Rachel, of course, was outraged by this. While a home visit from a social worker is normally required for people who take in foster kids, our situation was very different. We weren't strangers to our son. Rachel was his biological mother, and he had been living with us since he was born. On the other hand, having no formal legal connection to our son was making me extremely, and that's an understatement, extremely anxious. When the social worker came to our apartment, all I could think about was, let's just get through this as soon as possible. The social worker seemed pleasant enough, but as she started to interrogate us about our childhoods, our relationships, our families, our finances, I literally could not wait for it to end. After Rachel and I answered many of her questions, finally she stood up to leave. I was thrilled. It seemed clear that we had passed the test. The social worker left our apartment, and I breathed a deep sigh of relief. Thank God that's over. Believe it or not, though, 2 minutes later, we heard another knock on the door. I cautiously opened it, and there, incredibly, stood the social worker. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just remembered something I forgot to ask. May I come back in?" We invited her back in, and she got right to her point. "I wanted to ask you," she said, "what do you plan to say to your son about your family?" Rachel and I looked at her blankly. We said, "What do you mean?" Rachel, she said, "Well, what do you mean? What are you going to say to your son about your family with two moms? I'm just wondering what you plan to say to him." To her credit, my beloved wife Rachel somehow managed to keep her cool. She explained that we would tell our son that there are many different kinds of families, and that some kids have a mom and a dad, some kids have only one parent, some have two moms or two dads, some are raised by their grandparents, But what makes a family is that you love and take care of each other. She didn't end there. But that's not what I mean, said the social worker. When your son is 8 and goes to the park, and he's with his friend Johnny, and Johnny's playing in the park with his father, the social worker said, what are you going to say to him about why he doesn't have a father to play ball with? How are you going to help him grieve the loss of his father? That's what she said. I remember thinking in that very moment, she so deserves what is coming next. So what Rachel said is this. Well, by the time he's in that park playing with his friend Johnny, my wife said, her voice a sheet of ice, Johnny's father will probably be on his 3rd wife. And if Johnny's lucky, his dad will still be paying child support on a regular basis. So I don't think I'm going to be explaining anything to our son about that issue. I so love my wife, I can't even tell you. For one excruciating moment, Rachel and the social worker just stared at each other. Then the woman said, I did not mean to offend you. Rachel responded, too late for that. I quickly ushered the social worker out the door. By that point, I think she was as glad to leave as we were to see her go. She ended up giving us a positive report, and the adoption went through. And that adoption was really just the beginning of the start of our story as a family. Our son is now 18. He's handsome. You can see for yourselves. Brilliant and talented. We're both Jewish mothers. And earlier this week, I had him read a draft of my remarks. His only comment was to note that he does have a father figure, his Uncle Bruce, sitting right next to him tonight, our friend Bruce Anderson, who has known Jacob since he was born. And we all know that in our community, we often choose our own families, and Uncle Bruce is definitely a member of ours. I only hope I didn't embarrass Jacob too much with everything I just said. So what's the point of all this? The point, I think, is that the feminists were right when they said that the personal is political. That's true of everyone, but it's even truer for those of us in the LGBTQ community. I'm not going to lie to you and say that everything is A-okay and that there's nothing to worry about or that the Supreme Court won't roll back some of the rights we fought so hard to win. That would not be accurate, and one thing I'm definitely known for is my candor. But I can promise you that as long as I still have blood pumping through my heart and my veins, I will do everything in my power to fight for your rights, for our rights, and for the rights of our beloved families. Thank you so much.